Today, Ari works for Regavim as director of the International Department, ensuring people know the truth about what is going on in Israel. Regavim is an independent professional research institute and policy planning think tank incorporated as a private nonprofit company in Israel. The mission of the to ensure the responsible, legal, and environmentally friendly use of Israel's national lands and the return of law, of the rule of law, to all the areas and aspects of the land and its preservation.
We are also grateful to the Lux Sunset Boulevard Hotel for providing us with this beautiful venue, and to their staff for their assistance and the attention to the details that make the events run so smoothly. We have many great events coming up, including Charles Jacob, Shai Ben Tokea, Sharon Brook, and Andrew Bossum, and more. If you want to be notified of our events, please make sure that we have your email address. Ari will take questions following his presentation. Kindly turn off your cell phones and electronic devices. And now I introduce you to Ari Briggs. Thank you.
Thanks, Doris. Thank you. I'm not going to stand up there. I'm going to be standing here. And I'm going to use, obviously, a lot of visual aids. But first, a bit about myself. It's actually, I had heard of Doris's organization, the Children of Jewish Holocaust Survivors, for some years now. And I myself am a child of a Jewish Holocaust survivor. My father was born in Krakow in Poland in 1939. And his father sent, he was the oldest of his family. He sent his brothers away to the Russian side, and they kept moving back with the Russian forces. His father eventually was caught by the Germans and put in the Lvov ghetto, where he died. His mother she was blonde and had been able to buy, they had bought for her false papers, and they put my father with a Christian family, where he survived the war. After the war, his mother came back and had to work very hard to get her son back, and eventually they made their way back. They made their way to Australia in 1948. Even when they returned to their homes in Krakow after the war, there were pogroms, and they had to flee Krakow, and they went to Sweden first, and it took some time before the joint organized a flight from Paris to Australia. On their way there in 1948, the planes stopped in Iraq, in Basra, and they were hijacked. They were held in Basra as Jews during the middle of the Israel's independence war on their way to Australia, and it took the American ambassador with some Marines to come down from Baghdad to Basra to free this plane and let these refugees continue on to Australia. So it's very dear to me and very close to me, the whole idea, and I grew up knowing how important it was for the Jewish people to really determine their own fate, and this is really what my parents really instilled within me a love of Israel and Zionism. I was brought up with the teachings of Zeb Jabotinsky, so when Doris put out some papers here, so it's very close to my heart, and moved to Israel with my wife 21 years ago. And as Doris said, I worked in high tech, and after the Gaza expulsion, I felt that, none of us felt, or at least I didn't feel that it would ever happen. So, we went to the protests, we did that, but we thought something's going to happen, we're never going to pull out, and it happened. And after that, I said, well, as an activist, as someone who's always been involved, I can't just sit back and let these things happen and not at least try and influence something that's happening in our dear country. And so there I decided I would take a break from high tech and see how I can influence things. And I took a year break to become a shaliach, an emissary in Sydney. And there I met some people who'd come out from Israel, and I helped out. And they said, when you come back after your break, your 1 year break of, don't go back to high tech, come and join us, and we'll teach you some things, and we'll see how things go. And I said, okay, we'll try it. We'll see how that goes. I went back, and I'm still on my 1 year break, 4.5, 5 years later. And I have to say that working for an organization like Regavim has been a real honor. There are people who have this amazing love of the land, of the people, and it's amazing working with them. And we'll talk about the type of influence that has happened. But before that, I want to start off with something that happened recently. Stephen Harper, the Prime Minister of Canada, was in Israel. A hoo-ha and a lot of positive press and some negative press. He spoke in the Knesset and he was heckled in the Knesset, and this is a video that was taken there and the results of that. Maybe some of you have seen it, maybe not, but we're talking about the robbing of the Negev, and as just an example of what's going on in Israel, and that's a lot of it. How they're able to do it is very much based on their lies that they tell. And you'll see when an Arab MK in the Knesset is standing up and speaking in English, when the Prime Minister, our Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, is speaking, so here's a guy who's speaking in Hebrew, but an Arab MK stands up in English, obviously he's doing it so the foreign press pick it up and run with the story. So we'll see how that works.
שאותה רוח ואותו חופש, אני מקווה.
No water, no electricity. In Syria, amazing. No water, no electricity in this village. No water, no electricity. In Syria, amazing. No water, no electricity in this village. No water, no electricity. No water, no electricity.
שלא מצאתי שחברינו ערביי ישראל רוצים להיפרד ממדינת ישראל. כולם רוצים להיות כאן, ובצדק. אני מבין אותם.
So what happened was, of course, this was in the middle of Bibi's speech, and he didn't know the facts, whether he had electricity or water or not, but he answered back, well, we haven't seen them leaving, so it means it must be all right here. We obviously went down, took the photos and the video of his house, 3-story villa, electricity, water, of course, air conditioning, satellite TVs, all the modern cons that you would expect. And so the next morning, on the Prime Minister's own Facebook page, he took our imagery with the Regavim logo and put it up there and said he's updated Prime Minister Harper about the situation so that he understands the truth. So this is one way where we were very involved in a national issue, but it didn't stop there. I read a newspaper article later on that Ahmed Tibi, who was the member of Knesset screaming, heckling there, he's going to be going to Canada in April. He's got invitations. He spoke on 15 different news shows in Canada because there are a lot of people who don't like Stephen Harper there. And he's become a media personality because of this outburst, which was proven to be a total lie. In the Knesset the next day, he had to stand up and explain why. And he said, well, I wasn't talking about him specifically. I was speaking generally, which also is an absolute lie. But, that's how they try and get out of it. So we're going to hear about this silent surrender, how, and, the word silent, we could also use, or surrender or conquest. Whether it's active or passive, and we're going to talk about that. But it's not just happening in the Negev, it's happening also in Tel Aviv. This is 5 miles from Tel Aviv, between Lod and Ramla, very strategic location. Arab family has set up housing on his farm and is now claiming it to be an independent Palestinian village. This is one of the cases we deal with. In Jerusalem, there is actually these prefab houses put above the Begun Highway. I mean, obviously a security threat, and houses just going up overnight, and it's something that needed to be taken down. In the Galil, this is a nature reserve. Now, I'm going to talk a lot about national lands and state lands. It's a very different situation in Israel than it is here in the United States. In the United States, most land is privately owned, and then you've got nature reserves, which is you've got authorities that deal with those nature reserves. It's government-owned national lands. In Israel, it's pretty much the opposite. There's a very small amount of private ownership of land, 7% of total land is privately owned. The other 93%, 80% of that is owned outright by the government. 13% of that is owned by the JNF, Kakal. So 93% is managed by the government, and the government's been doing a terrible job, we're going to see here, in managing that over the last 65 years. And really, when we talk about 93% of the state of Israel pre-1967, that's our most precious resource. You know, without the land, we have nothing. This actually is a nature reserve. And this is the Meron Nature Reserve in the Galil. You might know about it. It's very close to Tzfat. And in this nature reserve itself, the yellow dots, the research, as Doris mentioned, we're a research organization that then does legal advocacy to try and get what we've found, the wrongs that have been done, made right. So we've done these reports on all the different illegal work that's happening in this nature reserve, people setting up houses, businesses, pools, clearing land for agriculture and the rest. And we reported this, and after this, leads on to a video. A lot of the time we report it, it's ignored. So what we have to do is we have to go public. We have to do an expose on a major news channel so that people actually take notice. There's pressure placed on authorities that they actually make some changes. So let's take a look at that.
המראה הזה הולך ונהיה יותר ויותר שכיח. בתים שנבנים בלב החורש בשמורת הר מירון. בעל הבית מרוויח בית פסטורלי ואנחנו מפסידים עוד ועוד דונמים של טבע בשמורה הירוקה. שנה וחצי האחרונות רואים התגברות של הבנייה הלא חוקית בתחום שמורת הטבע. במהלך החודשיים האחרונים ניתן להתרשם מהתחלות הבנייה שמופיעות פה למטה. הפקחים סופרים קרוב ל-30 התחלות בנייה, מרביתן כאן בכפר חורפיש, וזה בנוסף למאות הבתים שנבנו בעבר בניגוד לחוק. אמנם הבתים נבנים על חלקות ששייכות לתושבים בטאבו, אבל בכל מה שקשור לאישורי בנייה ופגיעה בטבע הייחודי, הם פשוט מצפצפים על רשויות החוק שמתקשות לעשות כאן סדר.
אני הייתי בבית משפט.
ומה בית משפט אמר?
שום דבר, נתנו ל5,000 שקל, שילמתי.
וצו הריסה?
איזה צו הריסה? פה לא ירסו, לא הרסים.
אנחנו איתרנו כ-30 פלישות לתוך שמורת הטבע בהר מירון. פנינו לכל הגורמים האמונים על העניין. קיבלנו תשובות שהנושא בבדיקה, בטיפול, כן בתחום האחריות שלנו, לא בתחום האחריות שלנו, ואנחנו מתכוונים לפנות לערכאות משפטיות בזמן הקרוב.
צריך להיות תמיד פה בזהירות משנה, לא לעורר מהומות.
לפני שבועיים הותקף פקח שבא לתת כאן צו להפסקת עבודה. לכאן לא נכנסים לבד.
הם לא נעימים, הם מאוד אגרסיביים שאני בא אליהם.
זה מעורר בך מחשבה שנייה כשאתה צריך עכשיו לגשת לכפר ולטפל בבנייה לא חוקית כזאת?
כן, כל פעם שאני ניגש לכפר אני חושב איך אני יוצא מכאן.
הם יכלו להרוס רק דרך האוויר. יבואו, F-16, ייתן טיל וזהו.
אז נכון, לתושבי הכפרים יש כיום מצוקת בנייה, אבל עדיין מותר לקוות שיקום הגורם שיעשה סדר לפני שכולנו נשאר בלי ירוק.
So it's a nature reserve, but also some of it's privately owned. So there is part of a village that is actually in this nature reserve. So there are restrictions on what they can do, but they really don't worry about those restrictions as well as taking over public land as well. In the Golan Heights, this is the border between Syria and Israel. And here's a legal building happening where their backyard backs onto the border fence. It's like our own Rio Grande, but if you remember a few years ago on Yom Ha'atzmaut, on Israel's Independence Day, a lot of Syrians crashed the border and went into Major Shams, the Druze village there. It was because of these houses being set up here that made it so easy for them. There was no sterile area on that border. Since then, and we reported this to the military officials, the authorities before that this was going on, and they ignored it. And only after such a crisis where you have thousands storming the border and coming across was something done about it. The houses stopped, knocked down, and the fence fixed up. But it's not just security here. That's the Mount Hermon. They're digging into the nature reserve of Mount Hermon and building themselves a house. So they're local authority is handing out land that's not theirs to hand out, and the Jews are building houses there. So in Judea and Samaria, this is where we hear, well, okay, if the Jews are doing it as well, they're setting up outposts. Well, actually, the thing is that the Arabs are setting up 10 to 20 times more outposts than the Jews. The Jews are really, the law comes down really hard, as we've seen even in the last weeks. But we see this happening all over Judea and Samaria, where Arabs will move out of their towns and start setting up elsewhere. They get supplied water and money from the Palestinian Authority, and eventually we see, and we also track, illegally built houses like this one. This is one of the bigger ones we've seen, funded by a Qatari prince south of Jerusalem on the way to the Gush. And their pool, and we found that house when it was in its first story, reported it, the authorities did nothing, and in the end, 10 stories high. These buildings here, a lot of people call them Bedouins, but this is on the way down from Jerusalem, that's Ma'ale Adumim there, towards the Dead Sea, and this is right on Road 1, going down to the Dead Sea, and here, these prefabricated houses, again, supplied by the Palestinian Authority. The yellow water tank here, supplied by the Palestinian Authority. Where does the money for the Palestinian Authority come from? From the European Union, from the US government, from the Australian government, they have the most aid per person of any so-called people anywhere in the world. And you can see Israel's had to build roads so that they can go in, go out. And it's very, very dangerous. A main highway, people pulling off, people pulling on. But then we also see ecological damage being done, where they're just putting trash, charging trucks to come and put trash over sides of ancient terracing and destroying the environment. And then, of course, water, which is a very important item in Israel. These are illegal holes that are being drilled and water being taken. And water is a single system. You take from one place, it's not going to be anywhere else. You can do a lot of damage to the water system. So we're also always looking into these type of activities being done illegally. But let's go to the Negev. Everyone knows this gentleman, the first Prime Minister of Israel, David Ben-Gurion. He said that Negev is the test of the nation of Israel. And all of us grew up on hearing about the Negev and greening the Negev and how successful Israel was in doing that. Well, over the last 10, 20 years, a new narrative has been created speaking about these issues: indigenous populations, historic settlements, number of villages, government discrimination, claims. And this is not talking about Jews, this is talking about the Bedouins in the Negev. And when we were growing up, all of you, whenever you went on to Israel, even till today, in birthright trips, they will always stop at a Bedouin tent or stay over in a Bedouin tent. And you'll get out, you'll have some coffee, you'll see how they make pita, you might even ride on a camel. This is part of the myth that was set up already in the 50s and 60s by David Ben-Gurion and the Labour government. Well, there are some Arabs that love us. You see, they can work with us. They're in the army. They're our best trackers. And in the 50s, it was true, 50s and 60s, there were some clans that were very, very friendly towards Israel. And they were in the army. 20, 30% of the eligible males went into the army. Today, that is down at 0.5% in the Negev. Now, of course, the tourists see the tents. They don't live in tents anymore. Were nomadic, but they've been over the last 30, 40 years settling down pretty much anywhere they like in the Negev, mainly in the northern Negev, because that's where it's more hospitable than the southern Negev. And they're setting up villages, hamlets that look like these, and like this, and pretty much anywhere they like, and spreading out. And this was, Israel's known had a challenge with the Bedouin population for some years, and every 10 years it set up a commission, usually run by a retired Supreme Court judge or other judge, professors and the rest. And the last one was in 2007, the Goldberg Commission, and what happened was Oxfam, I don't know if you've been Scarlett Johansson, right? Oxfam funded and fund a lot of terrible activities in the Negev, they funded this map which was created in 2006. It's called the Map of the Unrecognized Arab Bedouin Villages in the Negev. And their claim is that here's a population chart. They claim there are 400,000 Jews, 200,000 Arabs in the Negev. They claim that the Jews have approximately 100 villages, towns, cities, kibbutzim, moshavim, and the rest. And the Bedouin have 50. That makes sense, right? Double the population, or half the population, half the number of villages. The difference is that they say these are unrecognized villages, 45 of them unrecognized. It's what the Israeli government calls illegal. These are those villages where people have just gone out and set up tent camps originally and then built solid structures and then multi-story structures without any permission, basically just taking over state-owned land. And the government hasn't done anything. So this commission was set up to try and understand what's going on there and come up with a solution. Now, each and every NGO, and there were 53 local and international NGOs that were involved in presenting the Bedouin case, including likes of Oxfam, many of them sponsored by the New Israel Fund, by different European countries, Christian Aid, Norwegian Christian Aid. And they came and they presented this commission, and every day in this commission there were a lot of Bedouins sitting there making sure that none of the government officials said anything out of line, because then they wouldn't get their cooperation later. And they said, just recognize our 45 villages and the problem solved. Now we went in and presented, and we said, just instead of us coming and doing a presentation, come with us to the Negev. Let's go on a flight over the Negev. You'll see there's no 45 villages there. There's thousands of villages, small hamlets spread out all over the northern Negev. They weren't prepared to come. So we brought in some aerial photography and imagery. But before we go to that, this is Adalah, the legal center for Arab minority legal rights in Israel. And they talk about myths and misconceptions about the Bedouin of the Negev. And here is myth number 5. They don't live in scattered, unknown settlements. They all only live in 45 villages. Very clearly stated. This is Human Rights Watch, 2008, 39 unrecognized villages. And this is Negev Coexistence Forum, a NIF-sponsored organization. And they even map out those 45 on a Google map. The difference is that it's very simple. This is a 2D map. But all you have to do is click on terrain and satellite, and you get to see what's actually happening underneath that. So that's what I did. I used a browser, and I opened this up, and we started zooming in, and we saw, well, there's their one dot, but all over, and Google doesn't lie, this is just a satellite photo, you see 6, 7, 8 other villages, many of which have names, but they're not registered as one of those 45. Again, you can see it's just a browser. There's 4 or 5 dots, but there are many other villages on Google Maps. So Adalah just calls to withdraw this plan that was put in place after the commission to try and regulate Bedouin settlements. But they say just recognize the unrecognized villages, and all the problems will go away. Stop the home demolitions, engage in meaningful dialogue, and provide equal health and education and employment opportunities. That's their answer to everything. And the NIF, this is on their website, just recognize the unrecognized Bedouin villages and all the problems go away. It sounds fantastic, too good to be true. And most of these things are. When they sound too good to be true, they are too good to be true. So we went into the commission, we said, you're not going to come for a flight? Well, we'll bring that part of Israel to you using satellite imagery. This is a map of the south of the country. That's Beersheba in the middle, the Dead Sea. That's Gaza Strip, that's the Mediterranean, just so we understand where we're situated, right in the center of the country. And what we're doing is we've now put some different things on the map. These are Air Force and Army bases, and that's Beersheba. The other blue areas are towns and villages. The pink circles here, or image areas here, are Bedouin cities and towns that the government supports. These yellow dots are those 45 villages. And what we do, just the red area here is the southern Judea, also known in some parts of the world as the southern West Bank, and that's Gaza. So as we zoom in, what we want to do is we want to take a look at those yellow dots and see actually what they represent. So after we zoom in enough, and this is what we were showing in the commission, we go to actual aerial photography, and there's the yellow dot. And you can see that yellow dot is sitting over some sort of residential buildings, but like any geographer will tell you, if you want to map out where people live, you know, you can't just have a dot. Can you imagine a dot on the map for LA, representing LA or London or New York? Usually when you represent where people live, it's an area. You put a line around to show the expanse of where people are living. So these dots really do not represent where the Bedouin are living, but that's what they're trying to sell us. So we said, okay, well, let's just zoom out and see what that represents. What we actually did was, before zooming out, we put an area around each area of residence, 3 or more residential buildings. We put lines around, and we said, now let's zoom out and see what happens. Well, there's that one yellow dot, but we have about 10 different communities or residential groupings around. We zoom out again, and again that one yellow dot, but now we have about 20. We zoom out again. There's that one yellow dot. We're not seeing any other yellow dots, but we're still seeing many. You can see those areas that are marked in red, right? And there are a whole lot of them spread out over a large area. Now we see a few more yellow dots. There are 4 or 5 here, but again, there's about 100 of these residential areas. Just to give you now an idea, we just zoomed out here, and those red areas have all joined together, because when you zoom out, that's Beersheba. There are 200,000 people living in Beersheba. There are about 60 to 70,000 people, Bedouins, living in these red areas, spread out in a massive area. That's Beersheba. Over here is Arad, and down here is Dimona. That's Nevatim Air Force Base, Israel's most important Air Force base. And all around, now you see yellow dots here, those are those 45 villages, but you can see there are no yellow dots down here, there's none here, there's none over here. So what we proved to the commission was that map is meaningless. And Oxfam sponsored, again, another lie, to try and convince them just recognize the 45 villages. What would happen if you recognize them? All the others would then put up their hand and say, now recognize me. So that's really not the solution. And as you can see, you zoom out again, it's a large chunk of the country, covers 200,000 acres. And we'll talk about those numbers as well. So an example. And now we have to come back with specific examples. Well, where are these villages? Another one of their claims, not only that they have 45 villages, and we produced a document which you're about to pick up there called The Truth About the Bedouin in the Negev, and it talks about 6 different myths. One of them, again, is they have 45 villages, a myth. We've shown it. The other one is that these villages are historical. The next argument they come up with is, we were here before you. Our villages are here from before the establishment of the State of Israel. That means we have first dibs, right? We were here before you Jews. You only got here in 1948, right, when you established the country. So Al-Sirah is one of those examples they give. They put up this sign that it's going to be demolished. They also called in a UN special rapporteur to take a look at this, and they came up with a report in the General Assembly in 2007 based on this special rapporteur looking into the Bedouin issue, and they talk about Al-Sirah as a 350, and there's the important word, indigenous Bedouins. That's the next myth. They talk about the Bedouins not only, again, living in 45 villages, not only having historical villages, but being indigenous to Israel, to the Negev. And it talks about these 350 Bedouins, indigenous Bedouins, in 50 houses stretched over 4 square kilometers. So a large area. And what they say is that these Bedouins have allegedly lived here for generations throughout the Ottoman administration. Ottoman started there in the 1500s, and throughout the British Mandate, therefore showing that they were here before the State of Israel, meaning they have more rights. So what we did, we took we've not only specialists in aerial photography of what's happening today, but we also have historical aerial photography. So what we did, we took a look at this town back in 2003, that's Al-Sira, and we said, let's go back to 1990. Well, this is what it looked like in 1990, so it existed 20 years ago. And back in 1978, that's a grouping of tents. 1967, a few tents. 1945, the earliest aerial photography that was taken of Israel, Eretz Israel, was done by the British. And we had specialist geographers look at this, and they said there's no sign of residences here. There's no one living here. These fields are actually outside. We're talking about the area here that they say is a historical town. We say, well, it can't be historical if it didn't exist in 1945, right? That doesn't make you too historical. This is the case. We looked into Al-Sira, so again, 2012 to 1945. It exists there, it doesn't exist in 1945. And we looked into about 15 of their so-called 45, and we couldn't find them. Al-Arakib, this is the so-called village that's been destroyed 52 times over the last 3 years by the terrible Israeli army and police. Now, you know, we went back, we said, and okay, in 1989 there was a cemetery but no village. 1965 there was a new cemetery that we can see being established but no village. 1945, no cemetery, no village. Not too historical. Again, Al-Mahbach, 2012, 1945, nothing. Now we did this 15 times, we saw nothing. So they're pure myth, proven they don't have historical villages. Now, this is by definition, Bedou in Arabic means nomadic. So, you know, to claim on one hand that they're nomadic, on the other, they were nomadic, on the other hand that they have historical villages, it's not possible. You know, either you're nomadic or you settle down. You can't be both. So what we know from looking through this aerial photography is that over the last 20 years there's been a massive spread all over it. I want to have you take a look at this area. Keep an eye on this field here. 1993, you see a few tents in this area with some paths. 1996, 3 years later, you see that there's a lot more tents spread out. That's that area again of the field. And you see now there are a few white, and these are houses, solid structures that have been built. There's the field, and by 2003, within 10 years, the whole area is covered with solid buildings and more tracks connecting them all. And once we start zooming out, we see in that 2003, so 10 years, the whole area is covered by Bedouins that have just come in within 10 years and taken over a whole area. And what are they building? It starts off with tents, but this is how it ends. These are actually images of illegally built houses. These, you know, you'd think it's big. You can't get away with just building that and no one seeing it. You can see that. Well, no one takes any notice of it. They can do pretty much what they want, and they have been for the last 20, 30 years. And these are their houses, illegally built in, they're not legal towns or villages. These are just anywhere they've been able to set up in the northern Negev over that 200,000 acre area. And you can see they're quite substantial. And, you know, with the columns and the satellite TV and the water and the nice red roofs. And again, it normally starts behind an area where you can't see what's going on. They build the first story, then they take down the fence, the first story's up, and then they just keep going from then on. One reason they need such large houses is, on average, they have between 3 to 4 wives. Polygamy is in their culture, even though it's illegal in Israel. Remember the first video, Talib, the member of Knesset Talib, Ahmed Tibi was pointing to him saying he has no water and no electricity, and we found his house 3 stories. Well, he's got 2 wives. So for sure, you know, he needs, they need a story for each of their wives because that's their tradition. It used to be separate tents, but now they need to have different stories. And you know, this is how they're building it. And you know, here's probably has 3 or 4 wives in there, and the satellite dishes and the air conditioning and the rest. But how can they afford this? I mean, that must be going through your mind, right? But of course, they didn't pay for the land. They're not paying land taxes. They're not paying their town, their town council rates. But they also have illegal businesses, of course. So, dump sites, pirate gas stations. Who would think? Gas stations are one of the most organized and regulated industries in any country because it's dangerous. These things can blow up and they leach into the ground as well. In the Negev, we did a report. We found over 90 illegal pirate gas stations pumping. They had these bowsers, these pumps next to kindergartens, next to their houses. Trucks would come up, cars would come up, they'd fill them up, they'd take money. That's what a pirate gas. No one's ever heard of a pirate gas station. Not nowadays. Anyway, building material supply companies need to supply that. Commercial businesses, nothing's registered, no one's paying taxes. But the main money was from smuggling. We're talking about the Negev, right? It's in the south of Israel. It makes up 2/3 of the state of Israel, but it borders the Sinai. Now, the Sinai Negev border is based on milestones, and these are literally stones placed every mile. So there's no problem, and these Bedouin clans, tribes, they've got the same tribes and clans in the Sinai. And so they're smuggling through the Sinai pretty much whatever they want, and making some good money from it. Human trafficking, the US put Israel on the red list of human trafficking. Again, coming through the Sinai, drugs and weapons, very dangerous weapon smuggling. Israel very well, because of terrorism, put up a very serious fence when it pulled out of Gaza. And it's very difficult for anyone to get over that fence, terrorists. And so what happened was they dug all those tunnels back into the Sinai. They get supplies from the Sinai, but they also send terrorists and weapons out of Gaza into the Sinai and then back in through the Negev to wherever they need to go. Israel has built over the last few years a very good, successful new fence on that Negev-Sinai border, but it wasn't because of this. It was because we had 1 million Africans on their way into Israel. There are 60,000 of them today in Israel, so-called refugees, but more, illegal immigrants, for economic reasons. But really, there were 1 million. The reports were there were 1 million on their way. So Israel very quickly built a fence. Now it's stopped a lot of the smuggling, but there are other ways they're working out. You can throw it over when you don't have to get a person over. You can throw these things over, dig under. Come through other ways, etc. So it's still happening. So remember, this was their 45 towns and villages they spoke about. Well, Omer, which is a very well-established town, the mayor has had a real fight with the Bedouin surrounding. See, what happens is Jews, when they want to live in peace, they put up fences. They think, well, a fence is going to solve everything. The Bedouin is smart. They say, if that's where you've put your fence, well, we're going to camp up right against the fence because you've claimed what's yours, everything else is ours. So here's Pini Badash, he's the mayor of Omer, and they had to expand. They needed to expand. They had new neighborhoods for delisted soldiers, and had to pretty much work on a plan for this Tarabin tribe to have a whole new village built for them just to get them off the lands that were set aside for his town. But let's see what he has to say.
We are a state within a state. We're not far from the day when Bedouins in the Negev will demand autonomy here.
Now, Pini is actually a pilot as well, and the plane behind it is his. A few weeks after he went public about his issues, that plane got burnt down. That's, they'll do anything to stop people from talking out. So what does Israel look like today? Well, remember we put those red marks around the illegal building in the south. That's the Nevatim Air Force Base. Beersheba was here. Well, all we've done now is zoom out. That's the area we've zoomed out. I've been speaking about in the Negev, the Bedouin. That's the Gaza Strip. This is Judea and Samaria. And I've colored it red because, we've 95% of the Arabs there are under Palestinian Authority control. The rest of the world's already given it away on our behalf, right? Up here, we also spoke about the Galil earlier. When we track illegal building, illegal activity up in the north, we see this. And what's interesting is when you compare it to the UN partition plan of 1947, which looks like that, you see a definite pattern coming into play here. You see there's a connection from the Lebanese border and Syrian border down through Judea and Samaria to the Negev, connecting to the Gaza. and the Negev. And this was the so-called Arab state that was meant to be established in 1948, the pink area here, and that was the Jewish state. So you can see Beersheba wasn't included, and here Beersheba is surrounded by Bedouin. So you can see very much so by the government ignoring issues happening in the land, because Israel's had a lot of issues to deal with, and they've ignored this one, pushed it under the carpet. What we've had a situation over these 65 years is land has been misused, abused, and ignored by the state, and that's why Regavim exists, and that's what we've been doing over the last 10 years. But the ramifications aren't just illegal building, it's not just taking of the land, it leads to so many different issues that come up, such as a theft and crime we saw on the video previously, protectionism, hooliganism, issues on the road, I mean the amount of accidents in these areas, and generally damaging the quality of life. I want to show you a video where it talks about protection. If you would have seen the video we started off with, this was part of it. This is, again, is one of the exposés we did. It's not just about illegal building, but when a vacuum is created where the government pulls out, where there's, you know, anarchy, it comes in. The vacuums don't exist in nature. They're always filled. Law and order, when law and order pulls out, someone else is going to come in and take over. And you saw it on the streets of US cities in the 70s and 80s, and in New York, LA, Chicago, but these things were cleaned up because law and order came back. Well, we haven't seen that yet in Israel. So protectionism is alive and well. There it is, it's coming now. Okay. We're going to see that video afterwards. Let's go. Islamification, another issue that's very big. Has everyone heard of the Northern Islamic branch? This is pretty much in Israel, the Israel branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. Okay, and it's called the Northern Branch of the Islamic Movement. And the Northern Branch of the Islamic Movement has greatly influenced, since the Bedouin have settled down and settled in these illegal towns and villages, they've been setting up mosques for them, paying for these mosques to be built by collecting money all over the world. So they make sure their imams are placed that speak terribly about Israel and the West, just like the Muslim Brotherhood everywhere over the Middle East and elsewhere. They make sure their teachers are taken as teachers in the general public school system. They need to speak Arabic, they need to this, that, and this. Okay, only their people answer the tenders, only they're employed, so they're influencing the kids today. They have building days. They hire tens of buses each of these building days. They do about twice a year, come down to the Negev and help them build. It's amazing how much you can build when you have hundreds of experienced builders coming down doing that. Adalah, we spoke about before, this so-called Legal Center for Arab Minority Rights. They speak about creating a democratic state based on the equality of two national groups. It's not a Jewish state anymore. It's meant to be for all its nationalities. Israel carrying out a policy of subjugation. They talk about oppression worse than the apartheid regime in South Africa, truncating identity into Israeli Arabs. When you talk about an Israeli Arab, that's terrible now. You can only talk about a Palestinian identity. The goal, the eradication of the Zionist enterprise. What we're talking about here is one of these myths. The indigenous population, they only have this, Israel's discriminating against them. All these myths are brought up, and this is the narrative the rest of the world hears continuously. And there's not one newspaper in the Western world that hasn't written about the poor state of the Bedouin and how the state of Israel discriminates them, is trying to take away their land, move them into reservations and the rest. And it's absolutely incorrect. And the document that we produced proves that. And we now go out to these newspapers and try and convince them otherwise. Come, take a tour, see it from the air, see it from the ground. You'll see it's very different. A lot of them aren't interested because they've got their so-called readers want to hear the story about the poor Bedouin. So Hanin Zoabi, another member of Knesset, speaks about the conflict is not just the West Bank and Gaza, but also Arab Israelis. They know that they can portray Israel a colonialist and racist project. This is what mosques used to look like, a prayer hall and a minaret. Today, modeled on Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. Every new house that goes up has a tile above the door which shows Jerusalem. Again, the whole idea of everything in Israel is occupied by the Jews. This is Raad Salah, the head of our Muslim Brotherhood in the northern branch of the Islamic movement. And what's the challenge here is that the Bedouin are actually growing at the highest growth rate in the world. There's no people growing as fast as a Bedouin in our Negev. And 5.6%, that means they double their population every 15 years. So from 210,000 in 2010, they'll be at 420 in 2025. Okay, so what can be done? What should be done? Well, the government has to re-establish law and order, first thing. Court orders need to be enforced. All the necessary laws are on the books. You don't have to bring new legislation. It's all there. You just have to enforce the law. You have to empower the police force, improve the education system as well. We've found anywhere around the world, as soon as more women and guys are enrolled in university, the birth rates drop. Because then people are looking for jobs, they want to get ahead, and this and that. Healthcare, social, vocational rehabilitation, all these things need to be done. Remember, these Bedouins are Israeli citizens. They've been voting in every Israeli election since 1948. They have the same health, the access to clinics, access to schools. Israel, I mentioned that it's really the government that's really ignored the problem there. They've set up, we had a case down near Beersheba where the Bedouin have set up on Jewish-owned land, not state-owned land, but Jewish-owned land, and the state set up a school on Jewish-owned land for these Bedouins who were legally living on this Jewish land. So here it's not in the Bedouin stealing land from the state, but here's the state taking Jewish land and assigning it to the Bedouin. So that was one of the cases we ran for a guy in Israel, because it was his land, and his grandparents had come from Persia in the 20s and said, what can we do to help the country? Ben Gurion said, buy land in the Negev. They bought land in the Negev. Again, 2 generations later, there's not a Jewish town on there, it's a Bedouin town, and the Israeli government's put a school on there as well. Well, the court told the government they have to remove the school, and said within 6 years you have to find other accommodation for these Bedouin who have been living there rent-free for however long. So the government's obviously responsible. People talk about discrimination, one of the myths in there. This shows that the government budgets per person to the Bedouin authorities is higher by about 300 shekels, by $100 per person compared to the development towns in the south, so that's not discriminated against. It also shows the percentage of government participation in budgets, 80% compared to 51% for regular development towns. So you can see the government's doing what it can. It also puts together plans. Lakia is one of those 7 towns that the government set up. It was originally drawn up, a town plan for 30,000 residents. Today, that's Lakia. Only 11,000 residents live there. Why? Even though there were land claims, and we haven't got into the whole land claim issue, the government paid off that tribe that said, the Al Sana tribe that said they had a land claim for that area, because no other Bedouins will come in and sit, even if they're given a house by the government, where some other Bedouin tribe has a claim. Why? Because they won't wake up in the morning. It's very clear. You don't sit on another clan's land. So the government paid them off, money in the bank, extra land elsewhere, but people didn't come. So the government's wondering, what's happening here? They go back to the Al Sana tribal heads. They say, you promised, you got money, you signed a contract, this and that. Oh yes, it's not us that are threatening the other Bedouins from coming in and living in the town. It's a crazy uncle of ours who didn't sign, and he's now claiming that it's his land. So a plan for 30,000, only 11,000. What that creates are ghost towns, areas, neighborhoods that are totally uninhabited. The government has plowed billions of dollars into creating infrastructure, water, electricity. The whole claim that there's no water, no electricity, these are plots set aside, given for free. Every Bedouin male, once he reaches the age of 24, gets a quarter-acre plot with infrastructure all ready just for him to build for free. No other discrimination, no other Jew, Christian, Muslim in Israel gets that, only the Bedouin. And they talk about Israel discriminating against the Bedouin. Well, it's what's called affirmative action. They get free, they don't move in. Sometimes they move in, they build, and then they rent it out and go back and take some more land out in the in the area of the Negev. Again, very expensive. Here are streets, boxes set up for infrastructure, but no one living there. And that's in all the major towns there. So also the legal system has to play its part, and law enforcement in terms of responsibility. So why aren't they doing it? Well, we have, as you know, a hesitant leadership and a serious fear of international backlash, and we see it all the time, everywhere. Who we're up against, we've mentioned this, the NIF, all their sponsorship and other countries of organizations like Shalom Achshav, Breaking the Silence, BIMCOM, Rabbis for Human Rights, Negev Coexistence Forum, B'Tselem, all over the country.
There is a coalition of Israeli Arabs who found a partner today in the Israeli radical left. The national home, the Jewish Zionist home, is in flames.
Professor of geostrategy in Haifa University, not a right-wing guy. He's a left-wing, believes in giving away Judea and Samaria. He coined the phrase, the state of Tel Aviv, saying that the government didn't worry what was happening outside of that area. And he says what's happening is a coalition of Arabs in Israel and far-left post-Zionist groups who are basically taking apart the state of Israel as we've sat and established our Tel Aviv. He's one of the director on the board of Regavim. Finance, again, New Israel Fund, European Union, George Soros, Ford Foundation, Switzerland Christian Aid, Norwegian People Aid. And of course, this is the image that they want to get out. This is the fear of the international backlash. That's what they want the rest of the world to see. This is the Israel destroying Bedouin homes or Palestinian homes or Arab homes. It doesn't matter who, what name. Today they're not called Bedouins anymore. They're called Palestinian Bedouins. Okay, and there's and Israeli Arabs aren't Israeli Arabs anymore. They're Palestinian Arabs living, under occupation. And this is the imagery they want to come out. Here is an example, but there are hundreds of examples. The Independent, large British newspaper, 2011, and the wording is critical here. What they're using: the Bedouin versus Israel's bulldozers. As Jewish settlers, remember we're talking about the Negev here. Jewish settlers move into the desert to make it bloom, using those myths, Ben Gurion, desert bloom, an ancient way of life. Ancient being indigenous, right, is under threat. Speaks to Arab families on the fault line, and this is from 2011, end of 2011. But this is that they always talk about each one of those myths. Any newspaper article, you can take any newspaper article on Bedouin, and you can pull 1, 2, 3, number 5, number 6 myth out of them, because that's how they built the story about the Bedouins. So legislation was put forward to try, based on this commission in 2007. Legislation was proposed in 2011. It was then, Bibi said, no, we need to get Benny Begin involved. He'll speak with a good dialogue with the Bedouins. So there was new legislation put out in 2012. It was going through, past the first vote in the Knesset, then going into committee. The Bedouin were against it. The left say it's not generous enough. We say it was too generous. We had certain amendments we wanted to put in place. In the end, because of the pressure we put on it, this is a Jerusalem Post article. Shamir to Post: changes will be made to the Bedouin resettlement plan before a new push. This was recently. Benny Begin out, Yair Shamir in, which is fantastic. Benny Begin is not his father's, he is his father's son, but he doesn't act anything like him. Yair Shamir does. He's on very good terms with Regavim. We've spoken, we've sat down, we've taken him, we've shown his staff what's really going on there, so that they're not just sitting in an office in Jerusalem and only talking to Bedouins, but they're actually seeing what's happening in reality. So there's going to be a new plan. What do we actually do? So we do the research. We're a research-backed legal advocacy organization that focuses on these land ownership issues that I've spoken about this evening. We're doing the fact-finding, seeing what's going on actually on the ground. We gather the evidence. We then present it to the authorities in letters, in courts, in legislation we're doing, in lobbying, in the Knesset. And so we put together various different, as a think tank, a research organization, putting together various different programs. This is a new one just from this month. I picked it up from the printer on my way to the airport. The Truth About the Bedouin, and a new report, perversion of justice, Actually, Jews are being discriminated against in their own country by our own Supreme Court. And we're effective, and that's the most important thing. I've painted a very dark picture here today, but we do see a light at the end of the tunnel. It's not a train, because we can see, especially, we just had this Begin plan stopped in the committee, and Yair Shamir appointed. We've had legislation passed changing things. We've had demolitions, ensured demolitions happen, where the courts have said, 35 years the court said a building in the Galil was illegal. No one did anything. We made sure it was demolished. 35 years later, you know what happened? 2 days of strike of all the Arabs in the Galil. They closed down the schools. There was rioting, 1,500 people on the streets burning tires. But the house went down by the police. So we know we're effective, especially when you get requests to hold back, don't do any more activities, and we say, no, we're doing this for a reason. Just to give you an idea, a small video. This is in the committee in November 2013. Now I'll translate. This is a Bedouin member of Knesset talking about Regavim, saying this government is ruled by Regavim. They do everything Regavim wants them to do. This is in the committee about a small organization. I work for 10 people.
הממשלה עכשיו באמת המדיניות שלה היא כמו שבאמת רוצה והיא מכתיבה לה עמותת רגבים ועמותות אחרות קיצוניות.
Amutat Regavim, the Regavim organization, he's saying, ruled by Regavim. Obviously he's exaggerating, but when our enemies are talking about us in such terms, we're happy to say we've worked after 8 years. We've become more effective. We're winning Supreme Court battles. We're saving the land of Israel. What do we do outside of Israel? Well, we have an advocacy project. We educate, we make people aware of the threats. We counter other NGOs who are post-Zionist, anti-Zionist organizations that are putting out false information, myths. And we're promoting the national interests of the state of Israel. So that's the threat. And of course, we need help to stop that silent surrender. Time is actually running out. And if people do want to be involved in this struggle for the land of Israel, so people can sponsor research projects, be a partner in a Supreme Court battle, help build effective communication channels. I put out newsletters. We've got a website. I've got my card here. Take my card, be in touch, sign up on our website to get our newsletter, send it to your friends, and sponsor parliament meetings, trips or conferences. And most important, thanks for coming this evening and hearing. And now we're open for questions.